mitzvah, you say mazel tov. All right. So the title of my talk is The Three B's. No, it doesn't mean Better Buy Brisket or the Better Business Bureau. The three B's represents to me and maybe to you, Brooklyn, the Bronx, and the bungalows of Rockaway. And why do I talk about these three places? One, I grew up in Auburn in Rockaway Beach, not in the bungalows, about 3 blocks from the beach where the people live there all year around. And I saw the population swell during the summer. My late husband, Howard, he lived on Avenue U and East 12th in Brooklyn. His apartment was in a pre-war building, with each apartment having too many coats of paint to prevent the cabinet doors from fully opening. He often talked about the Spalding, which he threw against the wall. And he'd play in the gutter for hours until the sun went down, making sure to yell, "Car," each time that a vehicle appeared. And I had an uncle, Harry Goldberg, who was a math professor at Brooklyn College. He came for dinner and he stayed 10 years. That's what people did at that time. And the Bronx, my middle son, Jonathan, who's now 56, was married at the Bronx Botanical Gardens, and it was absolutely beautiful. So let's talk a little bit first about the Rockaways. The New York Times just a few weeks ago had a very big article. Welcome to Surf City, New York City. They were writing about the Rockaways. I have the article in front of me. All right. They mention Auburn by the Sea, which is nearing completion, and it's bringing dozens of new apartments and businesses, a wine shop, an espresso bar, a cafe, and a barbecue joint. And then they show a picture. The same article shows a picture of a brand new hotel on 116th Street. All right. It has a boutique. It has a pool, rooftop bar, a spa, and the cost, $300 a night. I hope it survives. It's a lot of money. Let's talk about the bungalows. I know that many of you have spent time in the bungalows. In 1933, there were 7,000 bungalows on the Rockaway Peninsula. It was a summer resort, a rival to Coney Island. It was replete with wide beaches, a long boardwalk, and hunky-tonk amusements. Many referred to the Rockaways as the Irish Riviera. The first bungalows went up in the Rockaways in 1905. And for decades, the bungalows were affordable summer rentals for working class vacationers. They were largely Jewish and Irish immigrant families. These were Hansel and Gretel-like cottages. They were 600 square feet. They had 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a porch, bathroom, and a lot of windows. The disappearance of the bungalows is linked to the enormous changes that took place, all right, after World War II. In the 50s and the 60s, you'll know this man's name, Robert Moses. He implemented urban renewal policies, and Rockaway went from being a small scale seasonal destination to a year-round community with high-rise condos and a lot of housing projects. Low-income citizens were often sent to live in the Rockaways, and many of them went to the poorly maintained, unwinterized bungalows. Many of the bungalow blocks were eventually designated as slums, and they were demolished. Now there is a huge development in Auburn named Auburn by the Sea. So let's look at the bungalows. So the families, they escaped the Bronx and Brooklyn, and they spent the whole summer in Rockaway. Dad, what did he do? He took the train to work every day. All right, the people turned brown by July 4th. We played stoop ball in the parking lot by the beach in the early morning before the cars even showed up. And we played kick the can, ring alivio, and stoop ball. Even my sons know stoop ball. And we hopped from one sand blanket to another. Once in a while, we were treated to takey cups, lemon Italian ices, or a chocolate egg cream. Now it costs $2.50 to have this. So we hopped from one blanket to another. And what happened in the evenings at the bungalow colonies, all right? The men, they played pinochle. The women, they played mahjong. They had costume parties with fat, hairy men wearing grass skirts and coconut shell braziers. This was their entertainment. And of course, there were the fireworks on Tuesday night. Most of the bungalows were destroyed in 1960 by Hurricane Donna. Let's talk about Auburn. Now, this could be Edgemere, Belle Harbor, Neponset, all right? So it's a small town. You knew everyone. If you did something wrong, a neighbor would call your parents. So I'm sitting in the car in front of my house. I am necking, only up to here, with my husband-to-be. We're in a Studebaker Hawk. And in 5 minutes, my neighbor across the street, Mrs. Pincus, she calls my mother, Jeanette. Marge is necking in the car. That was the way it was. Everybody watched out for each other. All right. We had a small mom and pop grocery store. I even remember the name, Logvin's. All right. So you would go in, there were no carts because there was no room for a cart. You carried the merchandise in your hand and you put it on the platform next to the cash register. Okay. And the proprietor took a thick black crayon that sat on his ear. Anybody remember this? And he takes the crayon and on the paper bag, he writes the price of each item that you're buying, right? And totals it up and you pay him. They didn't have any fancy schmancy cash registers, all right? And if I was short, say a quarter, he had a little black book. So he would go Gottlieb, my maiden name, Gottlieb, 50 cents. So I would go home, I'd give my mother the groceries and I would say, we owe Mr. Logvin 50 cents. And you know what she would say? Go right back to him now and pay him the money because Our reputation was at stake. To this day, I can't owe anybody a penny. When you're in a small town, she would say, your reputation is the most important. All right. So let's talk about lunch while sitting on the beach. For 2 months, I had the same lunch. A knish from the boardwalk, potato, cherry cheese, pasha, and a can of soda. That was my lunch. The Catskills had Ruby the Knish man and Shimmy the pickle man, all right? And of course, a seltzer was delivered in bottles at the back porch. We had the fireworks, as I say, Tuesday night. And then I would go to the boardwalk. I would come home. My mother wasn't spilkus. She didn't have spilkus sitting on pins and needles worried. It was safe because everybody watched out for each other. So now we're on the beach. We take out our towel, we lay it down and our chairs, and we leave this much room for the next towel, all right? And when you get up, you do it very gingerly. You don't want to kick any sand on their blanket. And then at some point, every mother takes out the watch and she says, no swimming for another 45 minutes. Oh, Ma, what were they worried about? You might get a cramp, right? Every mother was telling the kid, nope, another 15 minutes, all right? What a bubba misa that was. 82, I never met a person that had a cramp in the ocean, never. So by the time I had kids, I told them 15 minutes. They ate and then they could go swimming in 15 minutes. And then the dreaded September comes and back to school. And we had the insanely diving underneath your desk to practice for the upcoming atomic war. Today, my little grandson, he goes to school in Syosset and they have get out of sight drills. They hide. In 2017, it was reported that the Rockaway would receive $145 million to protect the area from flooding and damage from future storms. Let's go to Brooklyn. My first date with my husband was 1957. He's in heaven, but he's looking down on me. And where did he take me? To the Brooklyn Academy of Music, BAM, 30 Lafayette Avenue. He lived on Avenue U in East 12th. And he would say he went to Lincoln, but he called it Stinkin' Lincoln, all right? A woman named Patricia Schultz, she wrote a book, 1,000 Places to See Before You Die. I wonder what you would think would be the number one place that you should see in Brooklyn. The answer is walking the Brooklyn Bridge. That, she says, is the number one thing. She says it's a beloved experience, including joggers, lovers, and commuting businessmen. It's hard to believe that once the island of Manhattan and Brooklyn were two distinct cities. Scientific American, all right, they called the bridge a marvel of beauty. It's actually the 8th wonder of the world. The Brooklyn Bridge was an architectural wonder. built between 1870 and 1883. All right. Some people said, this bridge isn't safe. And so to prove them wrong, showman P.T. Barnum, he walked 21 elephants across the bridge just to prove how sturdy it was. The German-born engineer, John Augustus Roebling, never lived to see it built. The bridge is featured in the movie Godzilla, starring Matthew Broderick. And this giant lizard terrorizes New York. And where is he finally killed? On the Brooklyn Bridge. 27 people died during the construction of that bridge. And there were several notable jumpers. Brooklynese. Some of the terms I'm going to talk about also apply to the Bronx. So I'm sure some of you have seen this large sign in Brooklyn. It says, leaving Brooklyn, forget about it. One word, forget about it. Now, there's a term that's used, the word boss. So if you go to your local deli or your bodega, the guys call you boss when they don't know your name. You might even be called big boss, which is even better. I had a pediatrician, all right? She called me mother because she didn't have to remember my name. Today, she wouldn't do it because there's a crude word that often follows mother, okay? So that was the word boss. The next is the stoop, the front steps that lead to your building, where you sit and you gossip about the neighbors. You gossip about your daughter-in-law, the rabbi. How come you didn't talk about divorce? Because no one got divorced. My parents, there isn't one couple that ever got divorced. I'm not saying they were happy. All right, now there's another Brooklynese expression. Dollars to donuts. That means a sure thing, as in, I'll bet you dollars to donuts that she's really a man. The next term, agita, heartburn, or all right, or a general pain from stress. So you're giving me agita. That was from the Sopranos. The next Brooklynese. I love this expression. Who died and made you boss? Right? That was a phrase for letting someone know that they're running the show, not you. And then the term Goomba. To say someone is a Goomba is to say they are like family. If someone says, oh, that guy's a real Goomba, it usually means that he's a clown, but you would be wise not to mess with him. The next one, this next term, a lot of you may not know. It's called a corner man, a corner man. This is a guy who spends much of the day sitting on a milk carton in front of a store or a candy store. All right? Some guys do it to watch the world go by. But you know what? The other guys are working. They are bookies. That's the corner man. New Yorkers never say, stand in line. Standing in line is for tourists in Times Square. New Yorkers stand on line. To the beach. When New Yorkers take the subway to Coney Island or to the Rockaways, or they drove out to Jones Beach, they go, quote, to the beach. They never go to the shore. Who goes to the shore? New Jerseyans. New Jerseyans go to the shore. There's another really cute expression in Brooklyn. He's so cheap, he still has his communion money. He still got the first 2 cents he ever made. The next term is a tricky one. A Lucy, Loosie / Lucy. How many know what a Lucy is? Bodegas in Brooklyn would often sell you a single cigarette from an open pack. The single cigarette is called a Lucy. Of course, they didn't buy the pack because they didn't have the money. In an audience that I spoke to this past winter, someone told me that she lives in Staten Island and there are still some bodegas that will sell you a Lucy. The next is a Charlotte Russe. What is a Charlotte Russe? Here it is. A Charlotte Russe. So this is a favorite Brooklyn delight, although it was in Rockaway and the Bronx. All right. It was a pound cake in a cylindrical cardboard. All right. And it contained a false bottom. It topped with whipped cream and a cherry. And you took your thumb and you pushed from underneath as you walked along the avenue. A Charlotte Russe. When my sons were bar mitzvahed, I had a whole table of Charlotte Russes. Not a child went, but every adult ran to the table to get it. It was so nostalgic. The next Brooklynese, easy, a tar beach. That's the roof of your apartment building, used in the summer for sunbathing. The next word is, it's a nasty Yiddish word, a putz, P-U-T-Z. Alphonse D'Amato called Chuck Schumer a putz in front of a large Jewish audience. I guess most of you know that a putz is vulgar for the male member, the penis. I don't think he understood it at that time. The next is the word schmear. Schmear, cream cheese on a roll or a bagel. So you walk in and you say, look, I don't want just a little bit out of life. I want the whole schmear. Well, when I go to my bagel boss today, all right, I tell the girl or man behind the counter, all right, I want you to scoop out the kishkas, scoop out the bagel. Why? Because my endocrinologist, I have a record of what I eat, and she looks at it and she says to me, Marge, you can't eat a bagel from Bagel Boss. It's like 8 slices of bread. So I have them take out the kishkas of the bagel. All right. And when I do it, all I can think of is my grandparents who came from Europe. If they were ever to see what I just did to that beautiful bagel, they would have me committed There's something wrong with me. So I don't know if you've had a similar experience of telling them to take out the kishkes. Well, Jewish penicillin, homemade chicken soup. And I thought I would cover one candy that you might remember. All right. Jujubes. Jujubes. All right. This was what was called movie candy. All right. So many of them that they lasted through the entire show, 2 pictures, a cereal, and 2 cartoons and a newsreel. And I don't know if you remember the matrons in the movie. Big women, and they directed, get over there. They would seat the children in a separate section from the adults. And they would tell them, and don't put any bubble gum under the seats. Oh my God, the matrons. Then there's a term in Brooklyn called the Nickel Empire. Coney Island became a nickel empire, a nickname that was no exaggeration because the subway at that time cost a nickel. A hot dog cost a nickel, and the beach was free. And as many as 1 million visitors came to Coney Island daily to escape the summer heat. There's one part of Brooklyn I vaguely remember, and that was Pitkin Avenue. What was it known for? For shopping, all right? People would say, let's go to Pitkin Avenue, Grandma, all right? And you had Dubrow's, a cafeteria. You had clothing store owned by Abe Stark, the borough president. That was the shopping area. Then there was a famous place in Brooklyn, the Hotel St. George. How many remember it? It was a 30-story hotel on Henry Street. So find a native Brooklyn, New Yorker over 60, and you'll find that they have been to the hotel at least once. The hotel occupied an entire city street. They played host to everyone from Frank Sinatra, Cary Grant, Truman, and Roosevelt. It was famous for its Olympic-sized pool. And in its heyday, it is actually 1930s to the 1950s. So when the subway cost a nickel, the St. George pool cost 10 cents. That's it. By the end of the 50s, the St. George pool prestige began to wane, and it fell into disrepair. The pool was drained in 1974, and it's now a gym. Something interesting also, a neighbor of mine in Syosset grew up at the Pride of Judea orphanage in Brooklyn. And the Pride's annual bar mitzvahs were held at the St. George Hotel. They held the bar mitzvah services on Shabbos, and the next day they had a luncheon at the hotel, and everybody went swimming. That was the Hotel St. George. The name Brooklyn. Names come and go. Max is back. All right? I had an Uncle Max. There's kids in all the elementary and junior highs that have the name Max today. What didn't come back? Irving, Selma. All right? They didn't come back. We have some weird names. I have a granddaughter named Harley. I thought Harley's a boy's name. All right, it's a girl. I look down at her and I say to myself, motorcycle. Oh, hi, Harley. Right? And then I have another grandson named Connor. Connor. Do you know the Yiddish word for Connor? Enema. Wait till he finds out that his name Connor means enema. All right. And now we, of course, we have the problem with the name Karen. All right. Um, Nobody wants to be Karen anymore. Now, Brooklyn has been one of the nation's 30 most popular girls' names over the last few years. More and more parents are naming their little queens after the borough of Kings. And what states do we find many people naming their children Brooklyn? Where will you hear this? Utah, Idaho, Louisiana, Mississippi, and West Virginia. Imagine. David Beckham, the soccer star, he named his son Brooklyn. And of course, Frank Sinatra sang Brooklyn Bridge. Brooklyn is home to 250,000 ultra-Orthodox Jews, the largest community outside of Israel. They have their own ambulances and schools, yeshivas, a civilian police, and rabbinical courts. And there's a famous expression, if you believe that, I'll sell you the Brooklyn Bridge, right? I just have to throw in Orchard Street, only because it's just so wonderful. It's 8 blocks in length, and the street was named for the orchard that grew there in the 1700s. They have fine tailor shops, mostly manned by Jewish immigrants. It was no frills shopping. The merchandise is stacked on shelves, crammed into racks and hung from the ceiling. They spill out into the street, and Sunday was the busy day. Some storekeepers were hawking their wares outside. And the secret of Orchard Street is haggling. Don't be afraid. Just try walking out and see what happens. Think of what you want to pay and just keep repeating it your way as you go to the door. It's fun. You'll probably get what you want. The late Sam Levinson, he said, our mamas did not hesitate to bargain. Questioning a price was standard procedure. People like Mama, who could not risk spending an extra penny, questioned everything. And now we come to Ebinger's. Oh, Ebinger's. Their blackout cake. Ebinger's was a chain of stores across the borough of Brooklyn. It had about 54 bakeries at one time. And the most popular item was their blackout cake. The cake was solidified during World War II when the blackout drills were performed in homes around the borough. The cake was a staple hostess gift, a birthday cake and a holiday table treat. I was brought up in a home where you never went anywhere empty-handed, all right? You either bought a box of Barton's candy or an Ebinger's cake. The median age of the Ebinger's women behind the counter seemed to be about 80. But they could, I'm serious, just think about it. But they could slice and box a cake faster than a woman a quarter their age. Do you remember the machines? Like this and this? Brooklyn was such an ethnic mix, and Ebinger's was the one commonality. Everybody could walk to an Ebinger's. The box, if you remember, was white with delicate green diamond cross striping. Ebinger's went bankrupt in 19 1972. They were a victim of poor business management, increasingly health conscious people, and the supermarkets opened and they sold cakes. People bought the cakes on the last day and they froze them, tearfully defrosting them months later. By the way, Eppinger's was known for discriminatory hiring practices that excluded people of color and Jews from employment. In the spring and summer of 62, CORE came in and led a series of protests, and they picketed the company's retail locations. And on August 18th of 62, protesters sat down in front of the Eppinger's delivery trucks as they were about to leave, and they effectively shut down the business. All right. Now we come to something I love to talk about. After the destruction of the Second Temple, God created Lomans. Lomans. Lomans, modesty, thy name is not Lomans. Lomans was founded by Frida Lohman. Frida's another name, gone, all right? Lohman's customers, they were Lauren Bacall, Katie Couric, First Lady Betty Ford, Marjorie Gottlieb. Lohman's never really had customers. They had addicts. All right, ADDICTS. Oscar de la Renta gowns hung alongside less known designers. There was also a back room with an upscale inventory. But unique to Lohman's is the communal dressing room. Do you remember it? Imagine, you don't have to imagine, you probably shopped there. A large room whose walls are lined with mirrors, benches, and hooks, hooks to hold your clothing. There's absolutely no privacy. Each woman takes up what they call a station. A station. It's with a hook and the hook and the hook. Each one's a station, all right? And she hangs the clothing on there. And then she performs the communal dressing room dance. Okay? There are several variations of this dance. And some women were better than others. Some women immediately stripped down to their underwear and begin to try on the clothing. And who are these people? They are the Bo Derek 10s. All right? But not always. Others use the I'll keep my pants on until the last moment. That was their method. So here, a customer removes her top and pulls the dress over her head. While wearing the dress, she wiggles out of her pants. Well, whatever method, at some point, you end up in your underwear with everyone in the dressing room seeing your state of affairs. All that cheesecake that you ate at Junior's, it shows. So in exchange for substantial discounts on clothes, you must strip down to your skivvies in front of total strangers. There was a camaraderie among the shoppers. Also, a stranger, would give you a more honest opinion than a salesperson. One loud-mouthed, boorish female in Loman's dressing room. She yelled. It would fit you if you lost a few pounds. Just what you wanted to hear, right? The store was popular with older Jewish ladies with names like Sylvia and Pearl. Elderly men fell asleep while sitting in Loman's waiting for their wives to make a selection. And one fashion editor compared shopping there to a great treasure hunt. The chain closed in 2014, the last of 39 Loman's stores closed for business, including 4 in New York City. I have a granddaughter, 26, and I have to tell you that in a million years, she would never walk into that communal dressing room. I want to talk about the Brooklyn candy stores. The candy store, all right, there was a candy store on every corner. Just picture where you lived and you can tell where the candy store was. It was a simple business that one could open with very little money. I had an uncle that owned a little candy store. He had a 3-room apartment in the back of the store, and he stayed open till midnight because he was always home. The candy store not only sold candy and newspapers and comic books and soda, it had something else very, very special. It had a public phone booth. If you went into the candy store, on the right was a public phone booth. Most people before the war didn't have phones. So the public phone was very important. So when the phone rang, whichever kid was there first, all right, as if he was tall enough to reach the phone, he would pick it up and he would say, "Who do you want to talk to?" "I want to talk to Sam Schiff." "What's the address? What's the apartment number?" All right. And then he leaves the phone hanging. The other kid knows, don't touch the phone. So the kid gets on his bike and he rides to find the people. It might be a 5-floor walk up. All right. He just knocks on the door and says, "You have a phone call." All right. And the person followed him back to the candy store and got his phone call. The call was usually for the man of the house. It wasn't mandatory, but there was a certain amount of moral pressure for the person to give you a tip. All right. So what was the tip? 2 pennies. That was the tip. If you got a nickel, oh my goodness, what a sport. I once was giving a talk and somebody in the audience reminded me that he once called somebody to the telephone booth and they gave him a dirty soda bottle for him to redeem to get his 2 cents. That was his tip. All right. So for a dime, you could get a milkshake or a malted. And now we have Lainey Kazan. She went to Erasmus Hall. It has 6,000 students. And during her teenage years, she did what all the other kids like to do. She spent hours on end hanging out at the candy store on the corner of Church and Flatbush Avenue. Her friends would say, "I'll see you at the church." Her father would get so angry. He'd say, "You hang out there so much, I'm going to move a bed in there for you." Now we talk about Junior's restaurant. Cheesecake is the DNA of New York. Hail a taxi cab anywhere. Tell the driver, take me to the best cheesecake in New York. The odds would be that you would end up at the corner of Flatbush and DeKalb Avenues in Brooklyn at Junior's. Founded by Harry Rosen in 1950, Junior's was known as New York's best cheesecake. Brooklynites and others, they came there to eat, laugh, and argue over cheesecake. In the 1950s, an entire generation came of age at Junior's. The cheesecake was as important as the Brooklyn Dodgers, the Fox Theater in Coney Island and Brighton Beach. Today, they're even at Foxwoods Casino. You're going to pay like $8.75 for a matzo ball soup, a potato pancake, cheese blintzes, $16.25, corned beef sandwich, $15.50. All right. In 1981, when the restaurant caught on fire, a crowd of people watching the firefighters started chanting, "Save the cheesecake! Save the cheesecake!" Other famous places to get cheesecake were Jack Dempsey's, Lindy's Famous, the Stork Club, and Mim's Restaurant in Roslyn used to serve, maybe still does, Junior's cheesecake. The delis. There used to be a deli on every block. Grabstein's offered a hot dog and a pastrami sandwich and a knish. And residents enjoyed salami sandwiches and pickles wrapped in coarse white paper. By the 1950, Brownsville lost its shtetl quality. There was still fresh carp swimming in tanks for gefilte fish. The aromas of the Shabbos meal still permeated the air on Friday nights. And many Jews strictly observed kashrut in their homes, but ate at the neighborhood Chinese restaurant. Jewish delis are closing. There used to be thousands in New York. It's a few dozen left. The high rent and the recession forced the closing of the 75-year-old Stage Deli. Then they opened up a Quiznos there. You know, you can buy a sandwich for $5 at Quiznos. That's about a third the cost of what it would be if you went into a kosher deli. Mrs. Stoll's Knishes. How many remember that? Oh, Eleanor Roosevelt made campaign stops at Jonas Schimmel's Knishes. Al Sharpton had Knishes for lunch in front of Tilden High School. And Judge Judy says that her first memory of her favorite kosher food was the potato knishes that was sold at Brighton Beach. Next to egg creams, the other delicacy from Brooklyn was Mrs. Stoll's knishes. Don't confuse them with Shotskins, all right? So after a morning of swimming at the pool or the Brighton Beach Private Beach Club, all right, you crossed Surf Avenue and you ordered a Mrs. Stoll's knish for lunch. My mother-in-law lived in Wabassee in Brooklyn, and we would visit her when the kids were little, and we always stopped off on the way home to bring home knishes. When Mrs. Stoll's closed in 2005, people wanted to tear their sweatshirts in grief. They wanted to sit shiver. and they want to notice this and notify the survivors. It was replaced by a Subway sandwich shop. Isn't that horrible? Well, and then we have Brooklyn's railroad flat. All right. My grandparents lived in a railroad flat on East 98th and Rutland Road. All right, in Brooklyn. It was a second-story apartment overlooking the railroad. My grandfather could stand in the living room. He could wave to the conductor. It was right near the Sutter Avenue Theater. And what was so unique about the theater was free dishes. All right. You come this week, you get a soup plate. You come next week, you get a saucer. And in 20 years, I'm kidding. And in X number of weeks, you get a set of dishes. Right. So that was the kind of apartment. It had a dumb waiter. And something so unique. I remember her kitchen, my grandmother's kitchen table. You pulled out from underneath, and there was a place to store your cutlery underneath the table. So clever. All right. So that was the Brooklyn Railroad flat. Brooklyn has the first valet parking condominium. All right. I have the ad here from 2016, if you can see this. All right. So there are 85 spaces are available. It's on Pacific Street. That's the Cobble Hill neighborhood. You pay $185,000 to $200,000, and you get a spot for your car. This price includes drop off and pick off and pick up. Can you imagine spending $200,000 for a place to park your car? And then we had the Brighton Beach Baths. They opened in 1907 as a members only club. It had 12,000 members. It offered swimming in 3 pools, tennis, handball, mahjong, card playing, and a nude beach, a shanda, a nude beach. However, as the population changed and became less affluent, the club began to lose members. The baths were closed in 1994, and in its place, we have Rose, the Oceana Condominium and Club. All right, now let's go to the Bronx. There's only 3 places that have the word "the" in front of the names: the Vatican, the Hague, the Bronx. For people who grew up in the Bronx, the childhood recollections are fresh. Carl Reiner talks about all the street games he played. All right. He said the world had seasons. All right. Baseball season, yo-yo, red light, green light, hopscotch, jacks, and handball season. The Bronx is undergoing a revitalization. Silver Cup Studios opened up there. They were the ones that produced Sex and the City and When Harry Met Sally. It was a $35 million project. And now we have Arthur Avenue. It's been there for a long time. Long before New York's Little Israel became famous for its cuisine, Italian immigrants living in the Bronx made Arthur Avenue famous. Famous for its Italian shops and its delis. They had a newspaper. The Bronx had its own newspaper called the Bronx Home News. It was eventually bought out by the New York Post. We had a Lowe's Paradise Theater on the Grand Concourse. All right. The graduations were held there at the Paradise Theater. It was a showplace of the Bronx, the grandest theater built in the city. If you took a date to the Paradise, This was an occasion. It was a first run theater and built around 1929. Unfortunately, by 1933, when the Depression almost destroyed the Bronx, the theater had fallen on hard times and was closed in 1997. And when we think of the Bronx, we have 5 more minutes. When we think of the Bronx, I think of the program The Goldbergs, starring Gertrude Berg. I do a 1-hour talk on her. This warm 1950s sitcom starred Molly as the Jewish matriarch and a balabusta, all right? And they lived in the Bronx. Gertrude Berg was the second most popular woman in the United States at that time, behind one person, Eleanor Roosevelt. When Molly wasn't leaning out of her window and hoo-hooing her neighbor, Mrs. Kramer, she was in the kitchen preparing delicious meals. Her cookbook recipes offered chicken fricassee a la Uncle David. Molly, her husband, Jake, and Uncle David all speak with thick Yiddish accents. The children, Rosalie and Sammy, they sound more like the voices heard on Ozzie and Harriet. And who can forget the Molly tropisms? It's late, Jake. Time to expire. Right? She was wonderful. You had Modell's on Fordham Road. You had the Sweet Potato Man, Maxie's Candy Store, Wolf's Deli, Paradise Theater, Cousin's Record Store. It goes on and on. I'm disappointed I don't have more time to talk about the Bronx. So I'll conclude with the disappointment story. Lenny and Manny are walking on the Grand Concourse, and Lenny observed that, I don't think there's any word in Yiddish for disappointment. Manny can't believe it. You must be wrong, he says. Listen, I'm going to call my mother. She lived in the Bronx. His mother barely spoke English. All right? So he calls his mother, and Manny says, Mamala, listen. Suppose I told you I was coming to dinner on Friday, and suppose you worked all day Friday to make the finest meal ever, from challah and chopped liver and kugel and simmers and EPL, applesauce, and 2 kinds of strudel for dessert. And on Friday, 2 minutes before I'm supposed to arrive, I telephone and say something so important has come up. I can't come to Shabbos dinner. What would you say? What would I say? Wailed his mother. I'd say, Oi, bin ich, am I disappointed? Thank you so much.